Hey, let's scare Liz, suggested one of the girls. There was a wave of malicious laughter, quickly followed by approval. But one girl asked, why? She doesn't even believe in anything mystical, and she can't stand camp horror stories. The girl who proposed the idea smiled slyly and replied, oh, she'll believe what I'm going to tell her. And besides, we'll make it convincing. With these words, she let out a ringing laugh. That evening, a whole group of girls gathered in Liz's room. They joked around, chatted about the counselors, played truth or dare, and sipped tea. Finally, it came to horror stories. Polina, Liz's roommate, was a master at this. She could create a creepy atmosphere, standing on her bed in the dark with just a flashlight. The group quickly gathered around her, listening intently. All except Liz, who sat in the corner of her room with a cup of now cold tea staring at her phone screen. It was much more interesting for her to scroll through her news feed than to listen to these silly ghost stories. When Polina finished her latest horror story, she winked at the girls as a signal that the fun was about to begin and turned toward Liz. Stop staring at your phone. It's rude to ignore us. I'll do what I want, Liz replied indifferently. Oh, come on, Liz. At least acknowledge that you're part of a group. It's supposed to be fun at camp, and I'm just trying to lighten the mood. Liz raised her head and saw her roommate's look of mock hurt. Fine, I'll listen to one story, only because it really is rude to just sit here on my phone. Liz put her phone aside. So, what did you come up with this time? She asked with a smirk. This time I didn't make anything up. I'm going to tell you the real legend of the mental asylum. The wind outside intensified. A moment later, raindrops began to hit the window. The mental asylum? One of the girls asked cautiously. Everyone began whispering to each other. Liz frowned. Polina nodded in response and asked for the lights to be turned off. She climbed back onto her bed, turned on the flashlight, and began her story. There's an abandoned white building on the campgrounds. For those who don't know, that's the very mental asylum I'm going to talk about. At first, Liz's expression didn't reveal any interest, but with each passing minute, she began to immerse herself in Polina's story. During Soviet times, a girl came to our camp, Polina said, suddenly shifting her gaze to Liz. The corners of her lips curled into a sinister grin as she continued. And she stayed in this very room. From that moment on, she began hearing terrifying sounds at night, creaking, knocking, and sometimes footsteps in the hallway. When she started telling the counselors about it, they dismissed her as a liar. The room was silent. No one could be heard except the storyteller herself. The muffled voices of camp staff in the hallway had disappeared. It seemed as though the group of girls was the only living presence in the entire camp, not just the room. Polina made sure not to leave out any details but avoided straying too far from the main story. The girl repeatedly complained about the constant noises that kept her up at night. Eventually, the counselors began to worry that she was losing her mind. And then one day, her roommate returned to their room and found that the girl was gone. Maybe she went home? One of the girls in the group asked. Polina shook her head. All her belongings were still there. But there was one thing. When the counselors arrived, they found a note on the desk. They came for me. An hour later, a police car arrived on the campgrounds and an investigation began. It turned out that in this very camp, Polina emphasized the words, in our camp, children had been disappearing since the time the mental asylum was built. Sounds of disbelief came from the group. Everyone began asking, how? What happened? But the story was not as simple as it seemed at first glance. Polina continued, months and even years went by. The case of the missing girl was swept under the rug. During that time, the camp's reputation was restored. However, evidence surfaced showing that one of the counselors and the camp director were luring children here to sell their organs. They deliberately scared the children, so the other staff would think they were crazy and send them to the local mental asylum for treatment. Polina looked at Liz and saw fear in her eyes, a fear that hadn't been there before. Everything is going according to plan, Polina thought and continued the story. The most important thing about this story is that the mental asylum was built specifically for this dirty business. Goosebumps ran down their arms. No one dared to make a sound in the face of such an unexpected twist. Finally, the story began to reach its logical conclusion. Rumor has it that the missing girl, along with all the other children, comes out every night to the nearest field, looking for a way home. After these words, Polina jumped off the bed with the flashlight. The lights came back on. Liz immediately straightened her back and adjusted her expression, trying to mask her fear. Polina turned to her. "So what did you think?" "This?" Liz smirked. "Not scary at all." There were chuckles in the room. Polina glanced sharply at the other girls, and they quickly fell silent. "Imagine if something like this happened to you," Polina said, moving closer to Liz and looking her straight in the eyes. Liz swallowed the lump forming in her throat, but quickly put on an indifferent look. "Don't believe me? Well, we'll see when they come for you." "Who's they? The counselors?" Liz laughed. Suddenly, thunder struck outside and the room plunged into darkness. The girls jumped and screamed, some even diving under their blankets. Moments later, footsteps echoed in the hallway, and the door creaked open. From the shadows, a gruff woman's voice spoke. "Why aren't you asleep yet? Get back to your rooms now." The girls reluctantly returned to their rooms, flashlights in hand. Liz and Polina stayed behind in their shared room. Surprisingly, the storm outside quieted down, and the rain stopped shortly after. Liz tried to sleep, but her night was restless. Branches scraped against the window, and the faint creak of swings echoed in the silence. By morning, Liz convinced herself these noises were just the remnants of a vivid dream fueled by Polina's campfire story. However, the sounds didn't stop. For 3 nights in a row, Liz kept hearing them. She started sharing her concerns with the other girls, just not with Polina. "What swings, or don't you remember? There are no swings anywhere in this camp," Yulia said with a mocking tone. Liz suddenly realized that she might have fallen victim to Polina's camp tale. Embarrassed as she thought, "Damn that Polina, she got me hooked. This is so humiliating." The next day, Polina and the girls decided to invite Liz to the abandoned mental asylum to scare her once and for all. Deep down, Liz wanted nothing to do with the place, but she wasn't about to show fear. Eventually, she agreed. The group planned to sneak over during lunchtime when they could blend into the crowd and slip away unnoticed. The girls waited for Liz near the dining hall, while Liz stayed behind to change into cooler clothes since the midday heat had hit its peak. Finally ready, Liz reached for the door handle but froze in place. Standing in the doorway was a girl, about her age, with long chestnut hair tied in a high ponytail. Her gaze was unsettling, filled with an unnatural intensity. "Who are you? Are you new here?" Liz asked cautiously. "I'm here for you," the girl said softly. "What?" Liz barely had time to think before the girl stretched out her pale, thin hands toward her. "Only you can save me," the girl said. Liz slammed the door shut and locked it with the latch. Sliding down into the corner of the room, she hugged her knees with trembling hands. Her mind raced, and she found herself whispering prayers under her breath. Minutes passed. 10, 20, 30. By then, Liz had moved to her bed, trying to rationalize what had just happened. "No, it was just some new girl. Maybe she's sick," Liz told he. But the words the girl had spoken kept echoing in her mind. Liz was pulled out of her thoughts by a familiar voice calling out, "Lizka!" Liz jumped up and opened the door. Polina froze when she saw Liz's pale face and trembling hands. Liz recounted the entire incident in detail. Polina's eyes widened in shock before her brow furrowed with guilt. "Dasha, I told you to scare her in the abandoned building, not here." Realizing she had said this aloud, Polina quickly clamped her hands over her mouth. "What? What do you mean?" Liza snapped back to reality, standing up and staring intently at her roommate. "What did you just say?" "Liza, I'm sorry," Polina said hesitantly. "Yes, the scary story was just a prank. We wanted to fool you since you don't believe in anything mystical." "You really—" Liza didn't get a chance to finish before Polina interrupted her. "I know. All right, let's go for a walk or something. I'll make it up to you however you want." Liza couldn't find the right words. She simply pressed her lips together, her jaw tightening with anger at her friend. "You even roped in some Dasha. How low can you go, Polina?" "Well, she's not just some Dasha. She's my second cousin. She came here this morning, and we worked it all out." "By the way, where is she now?" Polina asked, trying to change the subject. Polina decided to remain silent. Over the next few days, the girls made up and didn't bring up the incident again. But something strange began to happen. Polina started having nightmares about the mental asylum. She'd wake up sweating and trembling, unable to recall the details of her dreams. The lack of sleep began to take a toll. Polina even complained to the counselors, begging to be moved to another room, but they dismissed her concerns. Meanwhile, Liz, to Polina's surprise, slept pee. Polina's distress grew as the noises she had once fabricated for Liz began to torment her instead. One day, Polina confronted Dasha angrily. "Don't play dumb with me," Polina shouted. "You scared Liz, didn't you? It's over now, so cut it out. Look at her. She's practically convinced it's real." Polina's eyes widened. She didn't know how to respond. Her throat felt dry. She told Dasha everything that had happened with Liz. Dasha was just as baffled. "Wait, what? How is that even possible?" Dasha asked. Before they could make sense of the situation, a boy approached Polina with a folded piece of paper in his hand. "This is for you, Polina," he said. Polina unfolded the note with trembling hands. Her heart sank as she read the words. "Liz is a good girl, but you're bad. I think we'll take you instead." Her heart pounded in her chest as she read the last line. Her breath grew shallow and she leaned against Dasha for support. "What's wrong? What does it say?" Dasha asked, snatching the note. After reading it, Dasha's expression changed to one of fear. She wanted to find the boy who had delivered the note, but he had already vanished. "That boy, do you know him?" Dasha asked. No, I've never seen him before," Polina stammered. After a moment of silence, Polina turned to her cousin, tears streaming down her face. "What do I do, Dasha?" Polina felt an overwhelming sense of guilt, realizing the gravity of her prank. Deep down, she understood that the spirits of the children she had mocked would never forgive her. Dasha seemed to come to the same conclusion. "You need to pack your things and leave. Immediately, go to the counselors and ask to go home." The counselors allowed Polina to leave and told her to call her parents. Dialing her mom's number, Polina explained that she missed home terribly and that the counselors had agreed to let her go. She was relieved, thinking she could finally escape this cursed camp and never return. But her relief was short-lived. Her mom said they were out of town with her dad and wouldn't be able to pick her up until the next morning. Tomorrow? Only tomorrow. What if something happens to me tonight? Polina thought, panic gripping her chest. Hanging up the phone, she burst into tears, almost to the point of hysteria. "Tomorrow, just tomorrow, and I'll be gone from here," she whispered to herself, trying to calm down. Suddenly, Liz entered the room. "What's wrong, Polina?" Liz asked, concern evident on her face. Quickly wiping away her tears, Polina responded, "Forgive me, Liz. Please don't hold any grudges against me." "I've already forgiven you." "But what's going on?" Liz pressed. Nothing," Polina muttered before leaving the room and heading outside. That evening, everyone had dinner and returned to their rooms. When night fell, the counselors made their usual rounds, checking to ensure all the children were asleep. Polina was tucked into bed, seemingly in a deep sleep, wrapped snugly in her blanket. That was the last time anyone saw her. The next morning, Liz woke up to find Polina's bed empty. Alarmed, she immediately told the counselors. Polina's suitcase, packed the day before, was still in the room, untouched with all her belongings. On the desk lay a note, written in Polina's handwriting and addressed to Liz. The note read, "Forgive me, Liska. They're coming for me soon. I deserve it.